You're listening to the audiobook version of The Wintermaker by Jason Lee Willis. This is part 2. Chapter 6, A Map of Hiawatha County. Old Copper Road, June 9th, 1961. Chris Looning knew nothing bad would happen to him as long as Biff was at his side, so he ignored the ghosts lingering in the trees and focused on pedaling. With his fishing pole in one hand and a bag full of iced crappie fillets in the other, control of the bike handlebars came down to a few pressure points with his knuckles, making steering in the gravel precarious. Biff, by comparison, could let go of his handlebars entirely, finding a mystical source of balance to guide him as they pedaled back home. Although it was still afternoon, the oak forest surrounding Old Copper Road hid the sky, holding onto the last fragments of the storm. Mud puddles and traces of fog allowed the ghouls to linger in the deep shadows behind the gnarled oak trees. Why doesn't Biff see them? Or does he just ignore them? Chris wished Jimmy was with them, since he was open-minded enough to acknowledge such things. Even though he felt safe with Biff, he tried to focus on guiding his bike tire along the most compacted lane. For safe measure, he recited the Lord's Prayer. 2 miles from the Nielsen farm and a mile past Cedar Point, the ground leveled to almost meet the lake, yet the dense forest of oaks kept the lake from sight. Between the Larson farm and the road to Carousel Park, the limbs of the oaks nearly reached down to the road, and even bold Biff stopped talking about sports. Finally, a billboard, stop sign, and intersection signaled the end of the harrowing journey. Carousel Park was ghoul-proof, Chris reckoned. Modern places can't be haunted. The entrance to the local amusement park cut across Old Copper Road with an asphalt road that led from Highway 10 at Aldrich, right up to the parking lot that faced the lake. The numerous buildings and towering roller coaster remained a sanctuary of civilization, where the spirits of the woods no longer ruled. "Did you go to the grand opening?" Chris asked once they came to the unnecessary stop at the eastbound stop sign. "Carousel Park is for babies," Biff said. "So no." "Chuck, Helen, and Carson visited over Memorial Day. Otherwise, I might have gone. If you want, I could get my mom or dad to bring us tonight." Biff took a quick exit breath as if excited, but then exhaled in defeat. "Nah, now that I'm working, I don't have time to play all the time." Biff pushed off and glided across the smooth asphalt. He's still mad at me for telling on him. Chris followed, and as he did, he saw a slow-moving car approach Old Copper Road from the south. Instead of continuing to Carousel Park, it paused at the gravel road for a few moments, and then followed them. Biff heard it and steered from the middle of the road to the edge. When Chris followed, he almost lost control of his bike. Gravel roads were wide enough for 2 vehicles to pass, but the main tracks were right down the middle, leaving a narrow path along the edge before turning to loose gravel. The car approached, and Chris felt the hairs on his neck stand on end. This is just like an abduction scene in a movie. Biff shifted his bag of fillets to his pole hand and waved the car past them. A shiny, brand-new red Thunderbird crept past, and seeing the beautiful car, Chris understood why the owner didn't want rocks and dust ruining the finish. It was the kind of car seen in parades, not on Old Copper Road. Where in the world is it heading? Past Carousel Park, the only landmarks were the Guerin Farm, the bridge over Canaranzi Creek, the McPherson Farm, and atop the hill, Biff's farm. From there, Old Copper Road led to the Dutch Boy Creamery and the Doc Jenkins Bridge, where the paved streets of Split Rock waited. "Sweet car," Biff said as the sound of the car faded. "That was a brand new Ford. It still had the dealer plates." Red circular brake lights lit up the chrome tail like the eyes of a monster up ahead. Modern, but still wicked. Chris looked around for witnesses, but not even the ghouls in the trees were there. The boys were alone. Biff stomped on his pedal to bring his bike to a skidding halt 10 yards from the rear of the car. A man's arm appeared out the driver window, waving them closer. Chris followed Biff's lead, who took his feet off the pedals to walk the bike closer. We could toss the bikes and run. "You lost, mister?" Biff asked as he neared the window. Chris could see a second person in the center of the back seat. "Lord, deliver us from evil." "Is this Old Copper Road?" the driver asked. "It sure is. If you're looking for Carousel Park, you just missed it back there at the corner." "No, we're not looking for Carousel Park. We're looking for Dutch Boy Creamery. Are we close?" A British accent and a fancy car? Who are these guys? "It's straight down this road. You can't miss it." "You see, that's the problem. We've missed it half a dozen times, it seems. We tried to find it from Split Rock, and then we got ourselves a bit lost here. Could you show me on the map of Hiawatha County?" The paper map came into view, but Biff didn't so much as take a step. "Honest, mister, you can't miss it now. It'll be on the left before you get to the Doc Jenkins Bridge. It's straight ahead." The driver wore a tweed jacket with felt patches on the elbow, and even though the map stayed at the open window, he turned to his passenger to exchange a few words that Chris couldn't hear. Biff turned and rolled his eyes. The expression meant one thing: idiots. Chris felt himself calm a bit and walked up to where Biff stood. As he did, he caught a glimpse of the passenger, a real-life Indian. Chris knew the difference between the local Ojibwe and the passenger. Indeed, the man in the back seat was from the subcontinent of India, or so Chris guessed, dressed in white slacks and a vest over his black dress shirt. "Do you boys live around here?" the driver asked. Biff stiffened while Chris nodded. "Good. Truth be told, we're not really looking for the Dutch Boy Creamery, which has proven to be an elusive landmark. We're looking for a private residence. The directions we have describe it from the perspective of an eastward approach: a bridge, a creamery, a dairy farm at the end of the curve of a road, and a purple house with a big red barn. The third farm on the right, our directions say." He's just lost, and as a scout, I have a duty to other people. "The Guerin farm?" Chris asked aloud, figuring the directions were now flipped. "Yes, we're looking for the Guerin farm. Could you show us the way if it's not too much trouble?" "It's no trouble at all. It's right over there," Chris said. "Come on, we'll show you." Biff didn't look pleased. A cheery smile and a helping hand make life easier for others. Chris remembered the Boy Scout code and hopped onto his pedals. After an awkward pause where Biff refused to move, he took the lead. A few moments later, Biff flew past him with the red Thunderbird following behind. His legs jelly, Chris struggled to keep up. I must keep myself physically strong. Both Jimmy and Biff were farm boys, which made them naturally stronger than Chris, who could only eat the right foods. Biking was the best chance for getting stronger. The gravel road was fairly narrow, with steep shoulders that led into the marsh grass. Hidden under the shadow of the tree was a simple mailbox where Chris stopped beside Biff and pointed. The driveway sloped down and away from Copper Road, which is why the visitors had probably missed it. The passenger rolled down his window. "Thank you kindly for the escort. When I tell the others about the hospitality of the folks in Hiawatha County, who shall I say provided me with aid?" "I've done my good deed today." I'm Chris Looning, and this is my friend Biff." Biff didn't make a muscle except to ask, "Are you an Indian?" "Reverence, Biff. Show some cheer and reverence." The man extended an arm. "Charani Basant, and no, I'm not from India. I'm Nepalese, if you must know." The pleasant smile vanished for a moment and then returned. "Thank you, boys. Have a pleasant day." "You too, mister," Chris called out. The red Thunderbird, leaving them behind, turned down the narrow driveway. "What'd you do that for?" Biff snarled. "What? It was the courteous thing to do. Garens are our neighbors. You have no idea who those people were." Chris didn't linger for a scolding. He'd done the right thing by helping. Chapter 7. Old Bones. Old Copper Road, June 9th, 1961. Despite its bluster, the storm only left a thick blanket of fog. Lily Guerin sat at the end of her dock and wept. Tied to the wooden post, the empty dream catcher remained aloof, oblivious to her pain. "Why won't you answer me?" She wiped her tears and looked up. Even in the fog, she could see the channel cut through the field of wild rice. Just beneath her dangling bare feet, the water was shallow. But past the channel, the cold waters of Lake Manitou held the souls of those she loved, those who refused to speak with her. "I thought for certain." Her nightmare had been familiar. First, she heard the screams of children. Then she spotted the bodies flailing in the water. They were children like always, with familiar faces. Piercing the cold water, the horns of the water serpent, the Manitou, the dreaded Wintermaker, moved toward the children like an apex predator. She knew she couldn't save them all, but if she saved the right one... Now at 78, Lily's dream ended differently than it had when she was young. Instead of her childhood heroes, her brother McGeesey and the gallant Jean Guerin, a pack of white teenagers answered the call for help, pushing her aside to slide down the icy slope and into the mouth of danger. "I can't change the past. I must live with the choices I made." Lily glanced at the silent dream catcher again. "Bah," she said, clutching the opposite post to help climb back to her feet. She straightened her back, hands on her hips, as she fearlessly looked out at the lake that she'd tamed. "If I feel like this at 78, how will I endure life at 100? Routine. Decades earlier, Lily adopted the habits of a marathon runner, employing physical, spiritual, and mental exercise all centered around pace. Her morning walk, for example, took her from the front porch of her old house down to the dock and over to the barn where she greeted all the animals. The small hay barn had lost most of its original red paint and leaned off-center from its foundation. A pig pen with large wooden rails stood beside it. A herd of about 24 sheep looked up from their pen closer to the lake. The grass had been eaten to stubs, leaving patches of tall thistles. After greeting the animals, she followed the path that led to the oaks. Once, she'd been afraid of the ghosts that haunted Old Copper Trail, mournful mothers seeking their children between Turtle Island and Bleeding Rock. But those mothers had only lost a single child. Lily had enough grief to out-haunt any of them. She walked the path until she came to Canaranzi Creek, where the owners of Carousel Park built a decorative concrete bridge that identified the route for the gondola rides. Following the narrow outlet to the culvert, Lily turned before crossing into Carousel Park property. 2 boys on bicycles raced down the road, heading west, holding fishing poles. Generations have grown up around this lake without fear. The thought did not bring her much comfort, though. She climbed the bank from the ditch to the gravel road and collected the newspapers. In addition to the North Star News, the delivery man from St. John dropped off nearly a dozen other papers that filled the gray, domed mailbox. With the news stacked like firewood in her arms, Lily followed her driveway back down the hill, through the remaining farm field, and to her son's house. Unlike the simple 4-bedroom box she inhabited, the house belonging to Lewis, once a 5-bedroom beacon of optimism, had fallen into disrepair the deeper into the whiskey bottle her son hid. Shutters held on by single nails, gutters drooped and sagged, clutter gathered around the cracked foundation, and the stairs acted as a barrier she refused to cross. Between the two houses, her small gardens were framed by spring flowers that waited for the vegetables to appear. A little picket fence wrapped around the small wooden house that was older than any other property on the building. On the outside wall, a rock chimney rose along the side wall to the high-pitched roof. Windows adored both sides of the central doorway, which had a flimsy screen door. Unlike the large house, which had red asphalt shingles, the small house had dark wooden shingles with clumps of moss growing in crevices and creases. By the time she reached her front door, the fog was beginning to lift. On her way to the tea kettle, Lily passed by the framed pictures of her family. The oldest was a 1908 portrait taken at the Minnesota State Fair, where she sat on an ornate wooden chair with Lewis on her lap, while her husband Gene placed his arm upon the headrest of the chair. A good day. Next, she saw a photograph taken by Superintendent White Wolf of her friends and allies, McGeesey, Fawn Chevril, Blackfish Labiche, John Labiche, Pierre Leduc, Christine Leduc, Martin and Dolly Nielsen, Bjorn and Emily Forsberg, Farrell and Florence Looning, Kermit and Mabel Crane, and her husband, Gene. The calm before the storm. The faces of her grandchildren followed, Michelle, Charlotte, Erica, Cameron, and her youngest, Nicole, now 17. How did I get so old so fast? A few minutes later, a cup of tea kept her company as she read her newspapers. The big house came to life around 7 o'clock, which was when she set her papers on the edge of the porch. Inside the kitchen, her daughter-in-law, Hannah, prepared breakfast, and a few minutes later, 3 bedroom lights came on. A few years earlier, all 5 bedroom lights would turn on following breakfast, but the oldest 3 girls had graduated and moved away. Just after breakfast, her son Louis and grandson Cameron went to do chores. Louis gave a nod and Cameron an enthusiastic wave. Cameron, unlike his serious father, was slovenly and awkward. His leather boots shuffled as he crossed the yard, and his shirt was untucked despite the suspenders that tried to keep his large pants from slipping past his waist. On the backside of his head, tufts of black hair defied the orderly pattern of his right side comb-over. The poor boy can remember any conversation ever spoken to him, yet is considered a fool by society. Nicole must be the one. Her youngest granddaughter came to the porch shortly after breakfast and gathered the newspapers. Even though Nicole was a quarter native, she looked nothing like the girls from Turtle Island Jesuit School. Her chestnut skin and dark hair revealed her Anishinaabe heritage, but she wore makeup and lipstick as if mirroring a Hollywood starlet, and her cheaply made red dress screamed for attention. Back inside her cottage, Lily glanced at a 6-inch mirror. Her white hair was pulled up in a bun, and she wore a cheap floral print dress. She had heavy dark shoes and nylon stockings that hung loosely below her knees. When did I become an old woman? Somehow, she still expected to see her 16-year-old face despite the accumulation of scars upon her heart. Lily remembered how she'd rejected her ancestry at the same age. Her pleasant routine was shattered by the arrival of a shiny red car that parked between the two houses. Lily observed it from a small gap in the curtains of her house. Her grandfather's voice whispered the warning found in the 7 Fires prophecy. Beware. The light-skinned race comes wearing the face of death. You must be careful because the face of brotherhood and the face of death looks very much alike. Luckily, the man who stepped out of the car did not fit this prophecy, for his skin was dark, yet not Native American. but his face is familiar. At the big house, Hannah appeared first. She untied the apron she wore and set it down across the porch railing. Then she descended the 3 steps that led to the walkway. Good afternoon. My name is Trani Besant, and I'm an anthropologist from Tribhuvan University. This is the home of Lily Guerin? No, Hannah answered and folded her arms. Besant smiled. It isn't? I was led to believe that she lives over there in the old house. Hannah lifted her arm to point. Lily shifted despite being almost invisible to those outside. Ah, yes, Besant said, pivoting to the rest of Lily's family, as the rest of Lily's family came out of the woodwork. Cameron stood at the screen door, hunched and nervously clasping his hands. In one of the windows shaded by the roof of the porch, Louis, holding a bottle, stood peering out. Nicole emerged, still holding a newspaper. Besant waved, and only Nicole waved back. He asked Hannah, Are you relatives of Lily Guerin? She's my mother-in-law. I'm Hannah. I'm married to her son, Louis. Ah, so these 2 must be her grandchildren. No, this can't be happening yet. It's too soon. Yeah, that's Cameron and that's Nicole, Hannah explained, but then glanced over her shoulder to the window Lily peered from. What do you want? Oh, I spent the last week meeting with tribal elders up at Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe, and her name was brought up on several occasions when we discussed the Battle of Sugar Point. I was told she was a witness to this event. Yes, I was there, and I saw much more than a battle. Lily had purposely become a recluse decades earlier, yet her family didn't follow her lead. I don't know about all that, Hannah continued. I suppose it's possible. Why do you want to talk to her about something that happened so long ago? I'm a historian, and I'm putting together research into the culture and history of the Anishinaabe people. I see. I'll go check with my husband to see if he wants a stranger talking with his mom. Just wait here. Hannah retreated up the porch steps and past the screen door where Cameron stood. He said, I'm part Indian. Do you want to talk to me? Just go back inside, Cameron. Besant grinned. Cameron, is it? I'm looking for someone with insight into the Medewiwin religion. Do you still practice it in your household? Cameron shook his head. We're Methodists. We go to the United Methodist Church in Wadena. Ah, well, as much as I'd like to speak with you, I'd rather speak to your grandmother about the religion in which she was raised. She's Catholic. That's how she met Grandpa Gene, but they were both kicked out of... Cameron, Nicole called out. Mr. Besant doesn't want to hear that story. With his feet placed exactly where they'd stopped, Besant pivoted back to where Nicole stood. Lily had seen enough. She stepped away from the window, rushed to the kitchen, and then took a new observation point at the crack of the front door. Hannah returned, this time with Louis a few feet behind. He stopped in the doorway and whispered something to Cameron. You can see if she'll talk to you, Hannah explained, but Cameron needs to be with you. Absolutely, Besant agreed. Nicole, it's time for you to come back into the house, Hannah finished. Nicole stomped away as Cameron led Besant to Lily's front door. Besant called out, Mrs. Guerin? Jean warned me this day might come. Lily took 10 steps into her kitchen and returned with a 10-inch butcher knife blade out. She whipped open the interior door and gestured with the knife level to his face, forcing him to let go of the screen door and take a few steps backwards. Knowing she was a sad spectacle, she let the knife speak for her. Mrs. Guerin, my name is Trani Besant, and I represent... I know who you are, and I know why you have come, thief, she said to him as he retreated down the front steps. She continued to flash the knife towards his face. I'm not here to rob you, Mrs. Karen. I just wanted a conversation with you about the Manitou. Go back to where you came from, servant of Babuniki. I might be old, but this old witch is not ready for the grave yet. Tell your dark master the time has not come, and if you break the accord, I will turn all of his plans to ash. Is that understood? Back at the Thunderbird, the driver put his hand in the inner pocket of his tweed jacket and moved to leave the car. Lily saw that Lewis still held a bottle of whiskey in his left hand, but now his right hand held a double-barreled shotgun, aimed in the general direction of the car. That's better. Trani Besant raised both hands and began walking backwards. There's no need for alarm. I only came to ask a few questions, that's all. I'll get in my car and be on my way. He exchanged an uncertain glance with the driver before stating, Stay in the car, William. Mrs. Guerin does not want to speak at the moment. Perhaps we'll come back another time when she feels different about the situation. Besant walked around the car, putting himself in the shotgun's line of fire. He nodded politely to Lewis, whose deep-set eyes withheld emotion. With a nod to Hannah and Nicole, he slipped into the back seat. A few moments later, the car slowly drove away. The family congealed in the space outside the gated garden, with several excited questions asked at once. Their voices were only four in a great chorus of voices filling her mind. Overwhelmed, Lily surrendered the big knife to her daughter-in-law, who held out her hand for it, and Lewis cracked open the shotgun for safety. Cameron put his hand on Lily's shoulder, but it was Nicole who looked angriest. Why would you do that? Nicole asked, her brow furrowed. Lily looked down. I need to protect my family. It's too early, which only means... She turned around and went back inside her house, past all the heirlooms, past the dream catchers. She opened a drawer in the end table where she found the journal. Tell me what to do, Jean. Chapter 8. Ravenfeather. Old Copper Road, June 9th, 1961. Nicole Guerin hid from the world in the folds of her Bible. Her eyes followed one word after another, one column after another, and one page after another, until her father's angry, drunken rants could no longer be heard. Honor your father and mother, that your days be long. Why isn't there a commandment about how to treat your kids? Something about the appearance of the fancy strangers sent him into a rage, and he began cursing his father, his ancestry, and everything else about his lot in life. Her mother made matters worse by challenging him, and soon the storm centered around their numerous marital issues. Nicole kept reading. Her room was neat and orderly compared to everything else in their home. She collected pictures of Paris, and her imagination sometimes allowed Minnesota to disappear entirely. Charlotte had left her record player, but it sat untouched. Nicole had once made the mistake of trying to drown out her father's drunken tirades, only to have the record ripped off the player and shattered against the door. Now, she sat in the corner of her room, wrapped in a wool blanket. Instead of picking a novel, she grabbed her Bible, letting the prophet Isaiah take her to a different place and time. It comforted her to know that Isaiah's world was a pit of chaos, and that he, too, turned to the Lord for comfort. She'd flipped familiar pages until she found herself in Isaiah 26, a song of salvation. Even though she tried to concentrate on the promises of peace, she could not help but notice repeated descriptions of the dead living again to join in the song. By the time she reached Isaiah 27, she closed her Bible when Isaiah talked about a serpent named Leviathan who lived in the sea. Even in the Bible, she could not hide from destiny. Lily had often referenced evil serpents and pending doom, but only in vague comments. Her mother considered such talk akin to paganism, yet the Bible also had serpents, witches, and other foul creatures. A gentle knock sounded, and Nicole flinched as the doorknob twisted. The door opened to reveal her older brother, Cameron. "Nicole needs you to drive her somewhere." Cameron had the grace of a beaten dog, thanks to her father and the relentless bullies at school. Although only 21, Cameron looked a decade older, with his nondescript crew cut, basic white t-shirt, and heavy green work pants. Lean and muscular, but bent, Cameron looked at his boots as if a servant in his own house. "The word is grandma, Cameron. If you keep using Indian words, people will treat you like an Indian. It's grandma." "Nokomis needs you to drive," Cameron repeated. "But why?" Nicole began, but then remembered her father was already drunk and her brother had epilepsy. She grabbed her purse from the dresser and walked past Cameron with a huff. The creaky stairs announced her arrival despite her cautious steps. Her mother was cleaning up her father's mess in the living room, but her father was nowhere to be seen. Her grandmother stood in the doorway, undefeated and resolute. She looked serious. "What's this all about?" Nicole asked when she reached the bottom of the stairs. "I'm too old to walk all the way up the hill," she said. "I need to speak with my oldest friend." Nicole understood, and just the suggestion changed everything. She escorted her grandmother to the car, adjusting the mirrors and seats. Grandma Lily's oldest friend was also the wealthiest man in Hiawatha County, and their friendship stretched back to the turn of the century. While Nicole lived in a musty old house on the edge of a swamp, Albert Fisher lived in a mansion overlooking the town. Driving past the McPherson farm, she saw the men gathered together along the railing of a cattle pen. "Gavin will be my classmate, but will he be a friend or an enemy?" Despite growing up on Lake Manitou, she didn't know many of the teenagers that would soon be her classmates. Following in her grandmother's footsteps as a babysitter for families with money, she knew many of the younger kids. On a couple of occasions, she watched over Brian and Julia Forsberg, but for her 7th and 8th grade years, she babysat young Christopher Looning when his parents went on trips to visit their new grandchild. She'd once thought Marlon and Betsy Looning lived in a mansion, but the 3-story home had been a hand-me-down wedding gift for Albert's daughter after he finished the construction of his own mansion overlooking the town. "This used to be a convent," Lily said once they entered the pillar driveway. "I stayed with the nuns for a while after my mother died. Everything has changed except for the bricks and that big willow tree." On a previous visit, Eunice Fisher explained how they'd used the bricks of the old convent to build the mansion. "Drive to the garage. Go past the front doors," Grandma Lily commanded. The driveway divided, with one lane looping toward the front door and another lane leading to the 2 garages. "Stay here," her grandmother said once she parked in front of the garage. A stout man wearing bib overalls and rolled-up sleeves stepped out to speak with Lily, who nodded as he wiped grease from his hands. A moment later, she retreated to the car. "Albert's not home," her grandmother said, "which means I'll need you to take me to my old home." Her old home? This is serious. The Mizhike Band of Ojibwe Reservation was so small it often did not appear on maps. The larger reservations in Minnesota, like White Earth, Red Lake, or Leech Lake, were formed around existing settlements and towns. The MBO, however, was a narrow stretch of land along the Blue Knife River between Lake Manitou and the town of Nimrod, which had a bridge that allowed settlers to cross the river instead of having to drive far to the northern reaches of Hiawatha County. Nicole's family had been the original Chippewa inhabitants of the land when the government distributed lots, and in the years that followed, The land at the delta was turned into a state park, and the lot upstream was leased to Triton Corporation, which dammed the river, stealing half of the worthless land from her family. For the past 10 years, Nicole had taken the same road to Turtle Island Jesuit School. Up Old Copper Road, into Split Rock, a left turn out of town, a right turn at Nimrod Road, and a left at Lyons Road. The village of Lyons did not exist anymore, but apparently its foundations could still be seen near the property line of the state park. The road led from a potato field to the wooded ravine along the Blue Knife River. A small cemetery, a grim welcome, marked the entrance to the reservation. Beside the road that paralleled the river, a dozen houses appeared in random locations along the trees. Some belonged to the Turtle Island Jesuit staff members, while others belonged to families that answered the call to return to their homelands. There hadn't been a new house built since the 1930s. But in all that time, Lily had never taken the trip. So why are we here? I need to warn my brother about the visitors. Her granduncle McGeesey managed to maintain ownership of his original lot, and north of that, the lot that had been bequeathed to the Catholic Church, resulting in the creation of Turtle Island Jesuit School. Take me to the office. The winding road finally opened to the campus of the aging school. It's a Saturday during the summer. Will anyone even be there? Even though the school had struggled financially in recent years, in yesteryears, the pocketbooks of the Catholic Church had been opened widely, sparing no expense. A cluster of 10 small houses had been built at the entrance to this house to house the staff. Nicole drove past the empty girls' dormitory and the tennis courts, which were filled with weeds that grew through the cracks in the old cement. At the center of campus, the student union and the dining hall sat empty, and the garage and parking lot near the river had only a few cars, unlike the full lot during the school year. Because of declining enrollment, the second girls' dormitory had been converted into a retirement home for a dozen year-round residents. Beyond the academic building, there were a few old buildings that had fallen into disuse. After reaching the northern end of the campus, the road looped back to past the 3-story boys' dormitory and then the Fine Arts building, where Nicole had spent much of her time. Finally, the fish-hook-shaped road ended at the superintendent's building. Your grandfather Gene once lived here, her grandmother said as she sat immobile in the car once Nicole parked. Later, Paul Whitewolf ran the school from his office. But that was long ago. When she did not so much as reach for the door handle, Nicole took the hint and got out to open the passenger door for her grandmother. She led her up a little walkway into the porch before entering the office. Well, Nicole Guerin, have you changed your mind? Sally Graysky, the school secretary, called out from the doorway of the hall. No. My grandmother wanted to speak with Superintendent Riel. Is he in? He should be. His car is parked out back, Sally replied. Nicole felt eyes from all over campus on her. What are they all still doing here? Her grandmother started walking toward the office. A tree once crashed right through that wall, she said, suddenly not in the moment. Nicole could see her agitation, but knew her grandmother did not want to talk about it. Superintendent Riel appeared at the doorway. Even during the hot summer months, he still wore a gray suit jacket with a turquoise turtle bolo tie that draped down over his crisp black shirt. His long black hair was pulled tightly into a ponytail that ran down his back. He was large and fit, an intimidating figure for the troublesome boys at the school. Ah, Nicole, how lovely to see you. Tell me you've returned to register for fall classes. Nicole looked to her toes for a moment and then shook her head. My grandmother needed to speak with you. Riel's smile slid away. Of course. Come into my office. Just the two of us, her grandmother said, her eyes glancing to the empty chairs across from the secretary's desk, back to Nicole. I need to speak to you about important matters." She walked past him to the chair in front of the desk and sat down without an invitation. Riel raised his eyebrows to Nicole. "You and Sally need to have a little conversation about coming back to Turtle Island this fall. I want things settled by the time I return." "I'm not sure that's going to happen. I already registered for classes at Split Rock High School." "It's never too late to change your mind," he said, turning towards his office door. "Did Mrs. Lang treat you well during the registration process?" "She did. All my classes transferred, but they took issue with my GPA. Mrs. Lang came up with some weighted scale that dropped some of my grades to an A-. It was either that or I had to retake the course." "Well, why would they do such a thing?" "To avoid having a Tish end up as a valedictorian, I suppose. I'll give them a run for their money, though." "I'm sure you will, Nicole. It won't be the same around here without you." "Yes, I'll miss everyone, but you know how much I wanted to be part of their music program." "Oh, I understand. Just know you're always welcome here." When her grandmother tapped his desk, Superintendent Riel sent Nicole a brief smile before he closed the door. Nicole replayed the incident with the red car, trying to understand why it escalated so quickly. After several minutes of waiting, the front door flew open, banging loudly against the doorstop. A bare-chested Ojibwe boy with short black hair and blue eyes blinked wide-eyed at Nicole. "Hello, Sakama. How are you doing?" The boy ran over and threw his arms around Nicole. "I thought you were going to another school." "Oh, I am. I'm attending Split Rock High this coming fall. What happened to your shirt?" "I forgot it," Sakama said, showing her a white cowrie shell on a leather band around his neck. "One day I'm going to be a midday for our people." "Really?" Sakama nodded proudly. "I'm learning from the same elder who taught my father. I was helping him build a new lodge." "No wonder you're so filthy," Nicole said, fixing his hair. "Have you been keeping up on your reading over the summer?" "I have. I read each night before I go to bed. McGeesy is teaching me how to read the teaching stones. They're picture words." "McGeesy? Is that who's preparing you to be a midday one day?" "He's very old." "Yes, I know. Did you know that my grandmother is his sister?" "Really?" "She's very, very old. She's older than he is." Sakama Riel kept the focus on the conversation on the adventures he'd been having all summer. And while the boy talked, Nicole realized that he knew far more about her granduncle than she did. Somewhere near the cemetery, a narrow road led to where McGeesy lived a simple life. Nicole's older sisters and mother had referenced him on several occasions, but never around her grandmother, who never explained what had broken their relationship. An hour passed before Superintendent Riel appeared at the door and was immediately gobbled up by his high-strung child. Nicole's grandmother shuffled straight out the door without speaking, leaving her to follow. Once in the car, Nicole asked, "So did things go well?" Her grandmother sighed. "Does this have to do with those men who showed up in the red car?" She pursed her lips. Nicole drove out of the school campus and down the long road that paralleled the river. As she neared the turn by the cemetery, Nicole's thoughts returned to her mysterious granduncle. "Why don't you speak to your brother McGeesy?" "I do speak to McGeesy. What do you think I was doing all that time in Riel's office?" "He was there?" "I don't speak directly with him. He's too stubborn and bitter. It works better if we speak through a mediator, and both of us trust Norval. The Riel family are our Canadian cousins." "Cousins? How so?" It was long ago, prior to the Battle of Bleeding Rock. My brother traced our family tree to my great-grandfather's grandfather. 2 siblings formed 2 branches. We are descended from the brother Makadiwa, and the Riels are descended from the sister Kishkiti. Lily huffed like a frustrated teacher. "Now, put my brother out of your mind and trust that I know what I'm doing. Can you do that?" A few hundred yards down the road, she saw a shiny green and black LaSalle, Albert Fisher's car. Trust? You haven't even told me what got you agitated. Of course, Nicole answered, and drove back to Split Rock. Honor your mother and father. Honor your family. Past the LaSalle, McGeesy hid in the woods. But what if you don't trust your family? What if your family keeps secrets? Chapter 9. Eye of the Thunderbird. The Mesquite Band of Ojibwe Reservation, June 9th, 1961. McGeesy Asabikashi and Albert Fisher sat under the shade of the pines and smoked their pipes. For McGeesy, he smoked from a pipe given to him by P.J. White Elk at his wedding to Fawn LaBiche. His favorite part about it was the authentic red pipestone bowl. With his eyes closed and ears listening to the sound of life in the forest, he ignored the departure of a car that drove past the cemetery. One day he'd join his relatives in that plot of ground. But I won't go to the grave without a fight. At his side, an instrument of death waited to be called upon. Beside him, Albert finished his offering of tobacco from a ridiculous-looking pipe that curved down from his lips to his chin and then opened into a bowl that looked like a giant mushroom. Where did you get that pipe? McGeesy asked. I bought it in London. It's a calabash pipe, like the one used by Sherlock Holmes. You should never buy a pipe. If you are meant to have a pipe, the Great Spirit will provide you with one. Albert was the same age as McGeesy, but a lifetime of living in luxury left Albert strangely withered and weak. Despite having more wrinkles on his face, McGeesy still felt as strong as he'd been decades earlier. Although Albert had surrendered to old age long ago, his eyes still twinkled with mischief. Okay, then. Let's trade pipes. You'll need more tobacco, McGeesy said, handing his pipe to Albert before standing and brushing off the pine needles. In front of him, cool breezes lift off the surface of the Blue Knife River, bringing with them the scent of moss and the stench of bloated carp. His grandfather Nanaconid had once told him these words, "Listen to the wind, it talks. Listen to the silence, it speaks. Listen to your heart, it knows." A mile downstream, he could hear the screams of leisure as dozens of alien families played in the waters of the Blue Knife Delta and the beaches of Lake Manitou. A mile upstream, he could hear the occasional slam of doors at the Turtle Island Jesuit school he'd once attended decades earlier. A few hundred yards away, he could hear the whine of gears and engines and the steady rush of water down the log chute of the Nicollet Dam. Yet for all of this, Manabozho was silent. Instead, Albert Fisher received dreams and omens. Why does Manabozho bless a rich white man with visions, yet ignores his most loyal servant? Finding another bag of tobacco, McGeesy returned to the big pine, climbing under it like he'd done once as a boy. Now tell me more about this dream. Albert looked up to the boughs of the pine tree, then stuffed the pipestone with fresh tobacco. I was lost inside of the willow. The one at G-Bay Hollow. No, Albert shook his head. The one in my front yard. It is the same tree, McGeesy countered, and it became apparent Albert forgot the old lessons. The willow tree is not just sacred for your dream catchers and lodges. The willow is an immortal tree. You and I are rotting away, but imagine if a shoot grew off of your toe, and all of your wisdom could be transferred from that toe and into a fresh young body. Along with your wisdom, your memories would also remain, making your immortality bitter, Albert replied. Perhaps there is a reason a man only lives a century, if he's lucky. Anyway, in my dream, it is the willow in my front yard. I sit under it, waiting for the nexus of past, present, and future to cross. Its branches wrap around me, and I feel it enter my veins of my arms, drinking my blood like some vampire. Or Wendigo. McGeesy found himself shaking his head. No, the willow was made to help us, not to harm us. I know, which is why I said it was a bad omen. I felt my Manitou leave my frail body and enter into the tree, and I flowed upon its branches like I was going down a river. I could travel down into the roots and see the past, or I could go up into the highest branches and see the future. And what did you see during your vision? I saw the Omodai. McGeesy gave voice to his disapproval. Did you speak with the Omodai? Why? The Omodai is dangerous. Lily told me the Omodai could defeat the Wintermaker. Lily sees things as she wants them to be. Yes, that is true, but the Omodai has the potential to be even more powerful than the Wintermaker. Remember, at the end of the seventh fire, the Omodai will be given the power of choice, and his decision could either destroy the world or bring in the blessed era of the eighth fire. That certainly explains why I saw so many of them. What do you mean? I saw differences in them. Different branches had different versions of the same person. Our choices today create different futures. Why do you think the Omodai is a boy? It's what is told in the Seven Fires prophecy. Why? Albert withdrew for a moment. I've seen different women within the willow tree. At first, I thought the willow was a woman, but then I realized different women were found in different parts of the tree. Tell me about the women. Well, one I knew, your sister. Yes, of course. And the others? Albert touched his face. She was wounded. Half of her face had been disfigured or mutilated. But then I saw another woman looking back at me with brilliant green eyes and crimson hair. The color of blood. The strangest woman, though, changed forms. Manabozho transformed himself during his visits to Earth. A shapeshifter seems to be a good omen. What shape did she take? First, she was a chubby teenage girl, and then she changed into a willow with branches for arms, and then the branches turned into the wings of a raven. A raven, McGeesy repeated, remembering his father. My father said ravens were bastards, that you should never listen to them. He told me ravens could drive you mad. I'm not sure what to make of that. Albert finished smoking. It's a good pipe. Can I keep it until the next time we need to talk about dreams? Manabozho meant for you to have it. The two old friends parted, but as Albert drove away, McGeesy saw a second visitor approaching by foot. He put away Albert's pipe and retrieved his father's hat, stuffed with raven feathers. Next, he grabbed the other relics that Manabozho had given him through the years. Properly armed, he waited for Norval Riel upon a boulder. Your sister just left, Riel declared. He had sweat along his hairline from the long walk. She came with dire warnings. Albert's dream might be a premonition of things to come. Men have come wearing the face of death, Riel stated. Albert isn't the only one with bad dreams. Was it the Wintermaker? McGeesy teased. Not sure. It sounds like the same men who stopped by the school yesterday. Did you extend them trust? Of course not. I politely sent them on their way, but I never mentioned a breath about your sister or her family. Yet they somehow found out where she lived. All of this time, and we still are not ready for a fight with the Wintermaker. McGeesy took assessment of the Asante Lodge, those who were called decades earlier. For his part, he still represented the Eagle, the priestly order in the fight against evil. Jean Guerin, who represented the Christian priesthood, had been dead and buried for decades without an official replacement. His sister Lily and Albert were the only other survivors of the original members, with Earl Crane representing his father Kermit in the role of leader. The other members remained untested, Ed Nielsen and Marlon Looning. The role of Muckwa, the bear, had been given to Paul Forsberg, who was now stationed in a military base across the world. After Fawn Chevril made accusations against Lily following the arrival of the comet, she left Minnesota, taking her position and the Labiche men with her. It was kind of my sister to warn us, but we have not entered into the time of the seventh fire. Your son will be safe. Yes, well, Lily has always been a bit eccentric. Even so, I told the others to stay vigilant. She wanted me to express her concerns about these men. My sister does not trust the prophecy, which is why her heart is always filled with fear. Riel is here for another reason, though. Your son is a gifted student, but that is all. Sakama is neither Jessica nor Wabeno, but he will certainly make a fine midday. I would still like you to perform the ritual. Lily has filled him with fear also. It could cause him to turn away from the path he is on. Are you willing to risk such a thing? Sakama is strangely wise for his age. Don't we owe it to our ancestors to at least find out for sure? McGeesy hesitated and chose not to answer. Instead, he asked, What do you see when you look at me? I see a mentor and a friend, a dedicated warrior guarding the light. McGeesy shook his head and lifted his left arm. Do you see this turtle shell? When I was a boy, I thought I was the Manitou. I thought I saw the Manitou moving through the depths of the Blue Knife River. Believing I was the great thunderbird, I pounced upon it, ripping a snapping turtle as large as I was from the bottom of the river. This is the shield of a fool. I am a great fool, but my sister is dangerous. You must be careful of her dire warnings. Have I told you about this hatchet? Riel shook his head. McGeesy reached for the instrument of death. It once belonged to a mighty Dakota warrior by the name of Adam Thunderface. He too was a sentry, looking to protect the world from evil, for his people had prophecies the same as my people. Prophecy is a curious thing, though. Like water, the harder you try to grasp it, the quicker it slips through your fingers. Adam Thunderface believed he had the strength to stop a prophecy from happening. So one day, while I was far away at a boarding school, he picked up this hatchet and murdered my grandfather and mother in cold blood. He would have killed my sister if it hadn't been for a group of white engineers who were building this dam. Why would you keep such a thing? It is a reminder that prophecies cannot be controlled. Led by dark spirits, Adam Thunderface created a bloody, violent mess because he believed he was an agent of fate. His will caused the death of my mother and grandfather, yet for all of his efforts, he did nothing to stop the prophecy from unfolding the way it needed to unfold. McGeesy paused for a moment to listen to the silence. Do you want to know why my sister and I no longer speak? Riel nodded. The angry words spoken by Fawn filled his mind. For all of her good intentions, Lily Guerin serves chaos. It doesn't bother me that she has rejected the religion of our ancestors to become a Christian. At every opportunity she is given, she fights for her own best interests. And instead of trusting the will of the Creator, she tries to control prophecies and steer her own path. She is no different than those two men who have shown up, who did indeed wear the face of death. McGeesy watched to see how Riel would react to his assessment of his sister. No, I don't believe that about Lily. It is true. My grandfather once told me that I was the great Thunderbird, destined to battle and kill the horned serpent like the legends of Ayash. He lied to me. Do you know when I realized he lied to me? Riel took him a few moments to ponder before he offered an answer. When the members of the Ouijigan clan tried to sacrifice you to the horned serpent? Instead of becoming a warrior, Manabozho has shaped me into a teacher. That's right. When Joseph Littletoad stretched out my arms and pinned me to the cold ground of Deadwood Island, I knew I wasn't destined to destroy evil. I was moments from becoming a Takpai Wonka. Magisi stopped, seeing an expression of disbelief on Riel's face. Come, as headmaster of the school, surely you remember the Takpai. Riel knew the stories. The Pukwudgies, the Memagwisi. Yes, they enslaved those who kill to do their bidding, and in the same vein, Joseph Littletoad offered me to the horned serpent so that I could be his vessel, his instrument on the earth. It was that moment that my sister interfered. When she used the water drum, she changed the prophecy, which affected the past, present, and future. And while she saved my life and the life of Garen, now matters are much, much worse. I fear she will do it again. When she was a young woman, the choice was easy. Now that she is old, she finally understands the horrible consequences of her decision. What horrible consequences? She did not end the prophecy. She only delayed it. We must hold steady or make matters worse. Riel's face twisted in frustration. So your counsel is that we do nothing? He wants to be a hero. Are you greater than Kichi-Manadu? No, but... Magisi raised his voice. I think your modern clothes and power over others have given you the arrogance to believe you can control the future and the lives of others. I have contemplated much about your son, Sakuma, and have determined he is not marked by Manabozho or the Great Thunderbird. Yet you think your knowledge is superior to not only mine, but also the Great Spirit Kichi-Manadu. You would ruin him to satisfy your ego and to stretch a prophecy that does not simply fit. I think I finally understand your point. Magisi took off his father's black hat and set it upon his lap. The will of the Great Spirit is a difficult path to follow. Stray to one side or the other, and you will get lost in the woods, either by walking too quickly like my grandfather, or too slowly like my father. We are both guardians, you and I, but I guard more than just knowledge. Do you know what I guard? Magisi shook his head. My family's curse, the sacred water drum, the white egg, the philosopher's stone. Magisi picked up his father's hat and set it on his head. I will take the knowledge to my grave, knowing that the will of the Great Spirit will find a way, with or without me. Only by carefully balancing upon the path of the Great Spirit can I fulfill my destiny. He paused. So on my left arm, I carry the shield of the Chippewa, those who sought to fulfill the prophecy. And on my right arm, I carry the hatchet of the Dakota, those who were meant to guard and delay the prophecy. If I am so lucky, perhaps I will be able to hand these weapons to the Great Thunderbird before I die. If not, I will continue to walk the path. I've sworn an oath, Magisi, Riel argued. You know that. Magisi shook his left arm. Then be the shield instead of the hatchet. Sit down. Tell me what my sister told you, and perhaps we can walk down the path together. This is the end of part 2 of The Wintermaker.